Secrets of historical romance. Love in the shadows. History keeps her own pace. A patient clock that ticks in stone and ink. But every century, a whisper slips through the margins, a note folded into a letter. A glance exchanged across a crowded room that dares us to believe in a different ending. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about a love that grew unseen. Between the ordinary hours and the quiet places where people kept their most precious truths. A romance that didn't shout, but settled into the heart like a warm ember. Waiting for someone brave enough to feed it, to trust it, to let it become real. In a city built from brick and rain, where the river runs silver under gaslight and the market stalls hum with voices from every edge of the empire, there lived a young archivist named Elias. He wasn't tall or loud, but his eyes held a tenderness that seemed almost old. As if he remembered plucking stars from a dusty shelf long before he learned to walk. He spent his days among ledgers and forgotten maps, tracing the routes drawn by sailors who had long since sailed away, and listening to the soft sigh of pages turning in the hush of the reading room. One fog-drawn evening, when the lamplight smeared into gold on the dust between the shelves, a stranger appeared at the door. She moved with a kind of grace that suggested she had learned to listen to the history of a room before she spoke there. As if secrets preferred her ear. She carried a trunk of papers tied with twine. A traveler from a distant quarter of the world who had come seeking a story that could not be found in catalogs or footnotes. Her name was Lila. And her eyes were rivers dark, fast, and capable of flooding a person's defenses with a single spark. SFX, rain tapping on glass, soft and insistent. Lila was not a scholar of the same field as Elias. Her work was more of a veil and trace. Of letters tucked away inside a ledger. Of a life lived in the margins of other lives. She believed in a kind of history that breathes where dust lies thick. In the spaces where people have dared to risk their hearts even when the world told them to stay safe, to stay silent. She had come, she said, to uncover a story about a woman who loved in the shadows of a man's duty. A love that survived the fever of war and the weight of a society that preferred neat, clean endings. Elias listened as she spoke, the way rain listens to the window. With a quiet willingness to admit that some things could be true even if they did not fit the official record. The trunk opened and revealed an assortment of letters. Maps with ink faded to the color of old tea. And a diary whose handwriting curved like a vine around the page. The voice in the diary spoke in clipped phrases and breathless longing. Telling of meetings behind closed doors. Of promises whispered in the ear of a nightingale. Of choosing a private happiness that could not survive in daylight but could be kept alive by memory itself. SFX, crackle of a candle. A distant street organ playing. The letters were dated to a century past. And yet to Elias they felt freshly intimate. As if the writer stood beside him and whispered, "Read me slowly." The woman at the center of the correspondence, named Amara, spoke in a voice that carried both defiance and tenderness. A balance that many romance stories forget to hold. She wrote about her life in a small seaside town where the horizon was a sheet of copper and the sea smelled of copper and tar. She spoke of a man, a scholar and a soldier, who carried her letters in the pocket of his greatcoat and read them aloud to himself when he was lonely. As if the words themselves could secure his fate. SFX, ocean breeze, distant gulls. As Elias translated the aged pages, something shifted in him. He felt the soft ache of a longing that had not yet found a voice in his own life, a longing for a partnership that did not require loud declarations. Only a daily choosing of each other in the ordinary acts of living. He, who knew the world by its catalog numbers and the neat order of archives, found himself inspired by Amara's quiet rebellion against the expectations laid upon her by family, class, and time. Lila's question sharpened his curiosity. She asked him what it would mean to live for another person's happiness as if it were his own. And he found himself answering with a sincerity that surprised him. A promise to search for a truth that could endure. SFX, clock ticking softly, paper rustled together. They followed the trail of letters, piecing together the distance between two lovers who never truly met in life but shared a single breath across the span of decades. Amara's handwriting grew more urgent in the last pages, as if the past was urging them to hurry, to listen, to believe that a bridge could be built from ink and risk. The couple's story grew into a map, a route through the corridors of a town that had become a museum of its own memories. It told of a rooftop rendezvous beneath a harvest moon, of a library that closed its doors too early for certain kinds of confessions, and of a vow sealed in a bottle that carried to see the message of a future they would not live to see. SFX. Sigh of wind through a window one night. Under the quiet light of a lantern, Lila confided that she herself carried a quiet ache. A love she had lost to distance and time. A romance that had burned out because it had no space to grow. She had come to the archive seeking a model, a beacon, a sign that devotion could outlast even the worst storms. Elias, touched by the vulnerability she shared, realized that the story he was chasing was not only Amara's but theirs as well. The idea that history can hold space for two hearts to be brave enough to choose each other again, in the present, with the same tenderness that filled a piano arpeggio as they walked through the city streets that had once been called home by strangers who had become friends. They encountered the everyday rituals of people living their ordinary lives with extraordinary care. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter to write letters that would not be thrown away. A shopkeeper counting coins while humming an old tune. A waiter who remembered patrons by the stories they carried in their eyes. It was these small rituals, the way a hand found another hand in a crowded doorway, the way a letter could travel across a sea and still feel intimate, that showed Elias and Lila the path their own affection might take, not a sudden, daily kindling that would illuminate a longer, kinder future. SFX, gentle rain. Street lights hum in the quiet hours that followed. They discovered a hidden compartment in a forgotten drawer, a second trunk within the trunk, containing a modern lover's note folded within an envelope that bore the seal of a century-old emblem. It was a reminder that love is a thread that survives without certainty, that it persists when the world asks for caution, when fear and doubt threaten to wash it away. The note spoke of a promise made by two people who could not meet, a vow to protect what they could not possess, and a quiet agreement to meet again, not in bravado, but in the courage to keep faith with one another even when the odds were stacked against them. SFX, heartbeats. A distant bell. The discovery did not spark a dramatic confrontation or a passionate declaration. It brought a gentler, more durable awareness that true romance is less about fireworks and more about a shared sense of responsibility to one another's growth. Amara's letters revealed a resilience that echoed through the years. She chose to persevere, to hope, to invest in a future that might be created only through patience. The man she loved did the same, laboring through days that demanded discipline and sacrifice, and writing letters that would travel far enough to remind them both that a future existed beyond the horizon of their own days. SFX, fireplace crackling. Soft footsteps. Elias realized that his own heart had been sort of catalogued, too, filed away under things that must be done rather than things worth imagining. Lila, with her bright curiosity and fearless tenderness, gave him permission to imagine differently, to allow a future where his voice and hers could speak in chorus, where work and whim could harmonize rather than collide. She had made him believe that a love worth keeping was not a threat to the life one already had but a reward in the life one might still build. And so they began to craft a present from the echoes of the past. They wrote letters to each other, not to be mailed, but to be read aloud in the quiet hours of the night, the words becoming a private ritual that strengthened their growing trust. They walked the city hand in hand, a modern pair with a foot in history and another stepping toward a shared horizon. They spoke of ordinary dreams, securing a small home where a kettle sang on a stove, a garden where lilacs could bloom every spring, A library of their own where the shelves would bear not only books but the stories of their days together. SFX, soft page turning. Kettle whistling in their conversations. They found a theme that resonated with many who listened to their story: perseverance. Not as stubborn resistance, but as a gentle, stubborn hope and insistence that love can endure, even when life throws obstacles in between. They learned to negotiate space for each other's ambitions, to celebrate the small victories, to forgive the occasional misstep that any two flawed people might make when learning to become a pair. They discovered that the most enduring romance is not just about how two people feel, but how they choose to act when fear whispers that it would be easier to walk away. SFX, soft clock chimes. Distant choir as the tale drew toward its quiet conclusion. The archives loosened their quiet hold, and the present began to feel more luminous. Elias and Lila stood before a window that framed the night as if it were a painting, and they spoke of a future that would be built not with grand gestures, but with daily acts of kindness, patience, and belief in one another. They would carry Amara and her unnamed beloved as witnesses and guides, not as memory alone but as a living testament that love to endure, to repair, to grow requires a partnership between two people who choose to remain, in every sense, present. SFX, soft wind, door sigh in the end. The love that bloomed in the shadows did not demand to be seen by the world. It thrived because it held on to a few simple truths: that history offers us a map, but our feet must decide where to walk. That a note tucked away can become a beacon when the reader refuses to let it fade. That romance, even in times of constraint, asks for courage, the courage to keep trying, to keep listening, to keep believing in the possibility of a future that feels like home. And if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of their secret kept safely in the margins of time. A vow spoken without fanfare, a kiss offered in the quiet. A life chosen together not because it is easy, but because it is true. This is the kind of history that keeps a flame alive long after the candles burn low, not perfect, not flawless, but real enough to give us hope. Enough to remind us that love can flourish even in the shadows when two people meet it halfway with kindness, with risk, and with unwavering faith. Night settles if your heart longs for a romance that endures. Consider this story a map drawn from the past, a reminder that the most enduring legends are not about grand entrances but about quiet commitments kept day by day. Love in the shadows does not vanish when the lights come back on. It waits, it deepens, and it teaches us to trust again in the ordinary miracle of two people choosing each other, again and again, until the ordinary becomes extraordinary simply because they share it. SFX, gentle final chime, a breath, a sigh of contentment. And so, dear listener, may you carry this tale with you as you go about your own days. May you remember that history's warmest romances are those we nurture in the ordinary corners of life. A whispered apology after a fight, a shared blanket on a rainy afternoon, a note tucked into a pocket that says, "I'm here." Because sometimes, in the most unassuming places, love reveals itself not with a blaze of fireworks but with a soft, persistent glow that invites us to believe in happy endings again. SFX, soft wind chime.